o'clock. And would like to have everybody take their seats, please. Okay. Want to compliment the general manager and his staff for the new clock. I hope everybody can read this. That was the impetus for getting this. So thank you to the general manager and his staff. I'm going to call the meeting to order. Today is Friday, February 14th, 2025. This is the Governing Board workshop. And with that, if you will join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, thank you. We have a quorum. We have two directors who are out ill, so they are excused. And I will read the new abbreviated meeting procedure statement. The Governing Board and its committees conduct all of their meetings in compliance with the Arizona Planned Community Association open meeting laws per Arizona Revised Statutes Section 33, 1804, and in concert with RCSCW bylaws, policies, and standing rules. Parliamentary procedures, as outlined in the most recent edition of Robert's Rules of Order, will also be followed in all meetings as appropriate, consistent with Bylaw 3.07, entitled Procedures for Owner-Member Meetings and Standing Rules, number 2 and number 3. Okay. With that, we'll move to the approval of the minutes of our last meeting of January 10th, 2025. Do I hear any changes, additions, deletions from the directors? Okay, then those meetings will be accepted as written. We will move into new business. We'll start with agenda item 3.01, which is new policy L14 regarding recordings of meetings of governing board and standing committees. I'll turn it over to Chairperson Christine Novello, Director Novello.
I could be the chairperson too.
B&F chairperson.
Thank you very much, President Leary. We discussed, or I presented this proposed new policy in our December workshop, took some feedback from the directors and from our operating staff, did some research on it, because some of the things that we were most concerned with was this notion of censorship. So I've made a revision that you will see reflected. Oh, actually, it's not redlined here. I apologize. Let me see if I can find it. It's in section 3.1, so I apologize that it didn't turn out as a red line. But 3.1, rather than presenting an entire method around how we would identify and approve recordings, I propose that this policy simply state that the recorded meetings will be presented without any editing or censoring at all. The research I've done so far and also consulted with our general manager and his experience as well at Wickenburg, but this bears out across other areas that I looked at where association boards like ours or any kind of a public entity has a publicly facing meeting that we choose to broadcast and then record. It should be broadcasted and recorded as it exists without any censorship. So in the event that there is disruption or poor language and so forth, that's simply retained as is so that anyone who watches those recordings would be able to see the meeting as it transpired. So that's the change to 3.1. The rest of this, the only other change I propose for us to consider is the retention under section 4. Simply deferring that the retention would go along with any procedure that we may have for records retention. I don't know if there is an existing procedure. If there is not a procedure that would cover this, an operations procedure that is, I recommend that we propose in this policy that we retain the recordings for a minimum of 5 calendar years following the date. Questions?
Questions for Director Novello? Director Hurley?
This one's on? Okay, Director Novello, there is a change in the statute that's before the House right now. Does this coincide with that?
Apologies. I did not check the pending legislation for this. We would have to keep an eye on that. What is the nature, or can you direct me toward the specifics?
I don't recall the actual House number, but it was in that packet that we got from the lawyer. And it gives, it specifies how long you're supposed to keep things. And it talks about edited and non-edited.
Okay.
And as far as putting it out as edited or as non-edited, I'm against that, because if there's some language, some derogatory language pointed at a specific person in a meeting, I don't think that needs to be kept in perpetuity. I mean, I do see the benefit of keeping the unedited tapes for review if someone should want to see it. But if someone has some degrading remarks about somebody in the meeting, I don't think those should be included.
Thanks for the comments. May I respond?
Sure.
I was looking at the...
Please.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. When we discussed it in December, your position was a little different. You were concerned about censorship and wanted us to reconsider that and make sure that it was in alignment. So should the proposed legislation that you were mentioning actually pass, we could go back and make sure that this is in alignment with that. I understand your point, though. That was originally why I tried to put forward this notion of censorship, but at this point, it seemed like there's so much concern about silencing contrary opinions that it may behoove us to go in the other direction. And that's just the reason why I removed it in its entirety, but I hear what you're saying.
Well, my concern with censorship at the last meeting was to be used as a lever against somebody. If someone wanted to cancel out what a director said and censor it out of the meeting, that would be uncalled for. But using profanity or derogatory language as we had last year, I don't think that should be kept. I think you need to have guidelines as to what you're going to keep and what you're not going to keep.
President Larry. So I just wanted to comment on the pending legislation. This actually, the retention that we have, or they have put as a recommendation of 5 years, is actually longer than the proposed legislation, which really that one just talks, what's being proposed is saying that if you do record meetings, you have to retain them. And I believe it's for 3 months. Yeah. So whatever, it basically just says if you're recording your meetings, you have to retain them for a period of time. And I believe it was 3 months. So this is actually longer than that. As far as the censoring and not censoring, that certainly is a policy decision for the board.
I'm happy to go back and revise that if there's a consensus toward that. We can take the extra time to make sure that we're watching that legislation and align it, number one, if that's what we choose. I think personally, or as a director, I believe that we would benefit from a longer retention than what was proposed, because for myself as a director, sometimes I've forgotten what's transpired in a meeting that occurred during my tenure. So a longer duration would enable me to go back and revisit that. These are not the official records of the meeting, but sometimes it helps me as an individual. It may help future directors and residents as well. Just my point of view.
So, yes, Director Hurley.
Yes. Do we know how long YouTube keeps files on their website?
I'm going to guess.
I do not. That's our current
perpetuity.
technology. Yeah.
Indefinitely?
Yeah.
So do we have any way to capture those recordings off of YouTube?
Yes, we do. We have the technical capability to download and to retain them privately if we wish.
Would it be more in our benefit if we kept those records rather than having them set out on YouTube?
Again, I think that's an operational decision, but I believe so, and I believe that's something that our team is looking at. But when they change the technology, the policy itself doesn't specify YouTube for that reason. YouTube everything is out there in public view, and I believe the general manager and his team are looking at a different tool, as we heard. Oh, you were ill, but we heard about the tool specifically that's under consideration, Diligent.
So our general manager has more information.
Yeah, so just to clarify on that proposed legislation that's pending right now, is that it does say that if you are recording your meetings, that they must be kept for at least 6 months, and to make the unedited recording available to any member of the association upon request. So again, there's some policy in there as to what that looks like, because you could maintain, if you wanted to edit them, you could maintain it and make it available, but just not actually keep it out in the public. So that, again, that's a policy decision for you all to decide.
Okay, any other discussion from the board? Yes,
I think
Director-
we had a couple of other questions. And
Oh, I got it.
apologies before
Yeah.
I'd spoken.
Director Grom,
Okay,
I saw you first.
Okay, I have one concern under 2.1, the last 3 words, other interested parties. What does that mean in the sense that we're retaining these for our members? So who do we have to give access to these minutes by including those words in the policy?
I would imagine, again, the reason why I chose those words, if I may respond, is that we have residents who are not owner members who may also be interested in some of the proceedings. These currently, they're broadcasted and accessible to anyone in the general public as well. Lastly, perhaps there would be some kind of a pending legal proceeding or a research project or such sort. We can remove the interested parties, but again, I'm not as familiar with some of our statutes as some of the other directors here, right? But I just know from my experience in the corporate world that there are lots of other possibilities, right? So you didn't want to limit it and say they're only available to these people, in my view. If you disagree, we could certainly make that change. The essence is really to ensure that the members of the association have access, as we were just covering.
Okay, Director Piaskowski.
Tim, you asked that question, Tim, about the YouTube. And since we're trying to figure that out, that's great.
Okay, any other discussion from the board up here? Okay, any questions, any comments from the audience? None. Any online?
Nothing online.
Okay, we should take a consensus to see if we want to move forward with this, move it to the regular meeting for, yes.
Sorry, there was a comment from Ann Becknell. YouTube only keeps recorded messages for 9 months. And Gary Bach, 13535, I think we need to retain recordings for at least a couple of years, since things move slowly in Sun City West. That sounds like an editorial comment.
We're old people, come on.
If I may.
Yes, Director Novello.
For consideration of my fellow board members, I think we can do a better job of aligning this policy to the pending legislation by putting at least referring to the number. I would recommend, assuming that we move this forward to consideration for a vote, I would recommend we revise it to explicitly align it to that proposed number. I did not do that when I made the edit, so, but I could do that as well. I would say in terms of records retention that, again, that's in my position, that is an operational decision in terms of how those records would be retained. It's more saying, especially if our residents view that YouTube can and will scrub some of these videos. I have not seen that, but if that is the case, then we want to ensure, and this policy or a policy of this nature puts the onus on our team to ensure that those unedited recordings are retained for a period of our decision. So responding to both of those. So first, I'd like to edit the policy to explicitly align it to the proposed legislation that's currently before the House, I believe. And then we can consider it from there.
Director Horvath?
Yes, I'm sure that YouTube keeps it much longer than 9 months. I was able to go back after I was elected years and view the videos to come up to speed, so I'm sure. And I agree with what Director Novella said.
Okay, so we have any other comments? Yes, sir. Mr. Director Chatton.
Just a quick comment that if we want to comply with Arizona statutes, it could be phrased that we will retain those recordings for 5 years, or as referenced in Arizona statute, whichever is longer. And that covers it.
Okay. Duly noted. So based upon Director Novello's willingness to make further edits to this, I'm assuming we're not ready to move this for vote. Is that fair? Yeah, okay. So we will not move this to the regular meeting for vote, and we'll return it to Director Novello so that she may make further edits. Oh, I'm sorry. Please enter your name, give us your name and your rec card number, and register yourself as well.
My record number is 1378887. I just had a question, and I don't know the answer. It's about minutes. I know sometimes minutes are, if the meeting is recorded, the minutes are taken in a different format because everything is on the recording for reference. I don't know how long minutes are expected to be taken, but if that's the procedure, wouldn't the minutes have to be, or the recordings have to be retained as long as the minutes?
Okay, thank you. That's a good, well, the official record of the meeting is the minutes, not the video. So the video could disappear before the minutes do. If, you know, it's conceivable. I'm not saying it will, but it could.
I thought there were if it's recorded, I thought sometimes the minutes just gave highlights and didn't give any details. And because they could always refer back to the recording. So I didn't know, maybe I heard something that's not correct.
Our minutes are taken according to Robert's Rules of Order, and they are the official record of the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's move to item number 3.02. I think this will be a long but an interesting discussion. This is, I'll turn this over to Director Novello, who is the chairperson of the B&F Committee and our treasurer. Director Novello.
Thanks again, President Leary, and thank you, directors. I've been giving you updates on this process, very brief updates over the past few months. But in short, Budget and Finance, like all of our committees, reviews policies every year to ensure that those policies are in alignment with our association's ideals and continue to support our association's best interests. Every single one of our committees does this. Budget and Finance specifically looks at those financial policies. As a part of that review, the Budget and Finance Committee felt pretty strongly that they, as a whole, wanted to dive in and really study our investment strategy and the underlying policies, FI4 for our reserve study and reserve fund, and FI12, which is our investment policy. So they wanted to do that and felt compelled that before revising or certifying that the policies were sufficient to continue to uphold our association's ideals and so forth, this required a lot of extra work. So we commissioned a working group that's basically a special group, as I believe we all know, a subset of the Budget and Finance Committee, that would dive in and in a short-term nature, actually study these policies. And so we commissioned that working group back in November of 2024. Working group consisted of Rick Rufai and Mickey Jacobs, who leads that working group, advised by myself, as well as by Cliff Swan. So working group got together and started the in-depth analysis of our investment strategy with a view towards several ideals. Again, wanting to ensure that the stated investment policies for both our reserve study and for the investment policy continued to support, that we didn't miss any opportunities to improve, and so forth. So they dove in, and they've been studying this over a period of time, bringing in other resources as needed. Our reserve analyst, Pete Finelli, has joined us as our professional investment management firm. Cap Trust also participated as the team has gone forward. So we're here today to give a substantial update, and both Mickey and Rick are here, and they can start coming up to the podium now, because I'm going to ask them to walk us through the details of the analysis and what they've found so far. What we're being asked to do here as a board today is really to take a look at the underpinnings of the proposed strategy revisions, because there are some areas, plural, of change, and this goes far beyond the asset allocation mix that tends to be most of our focus, but it goes beyond that. So this team has looked at a variety of components of our strategy, and they'll walk you through the analysis, the findings so far. And again, this is the start of our ability as a board and an association to provide some detailed feedback. We need that feedback so that the Budget and Finance Committee and the working group that is a part of that can then structure, refine any proposed policy changes and come back to us with a recommendation. So again, today is a very deep dive on the strategy, the roadmap for those changes, and why they're so important. So again, there are several components to the recommendations or the findings so far beyond the asset mix. And with that, we're going to leave this in Mickey Jacobs' hands. So thanks, Mickey.
So exactly what are you expect from us today?
Questions,
Okay.
detailed questions.
Okay.
You may not have had the opportunity to ask those questions in Budget and Finance meetings.
Okay.
Or in any other way. So this is a great way to ask questions, become informed about why we've recommended this, and again, feedback on how to proceed next, so that the Budget and Finance Committee can formulate an actual recommendation, a policy recommendation. Again, the changes could include, they go beyond asset mix and so forth. So again, we're in a position here where we're actually engaging you in a conversation, something that we hope to do more of, but that's the essence.
Okay, thank you very much. I just wanted to be sure.
Oh, that's okay. And I know it's totally up to Mickey. She's going to be doing most of the presentation. It may help because of the detailed nature of the topics to hear the messages first before diving into the detailed questions. But again, I turn it over to Mickey, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
No.
Good. Okay. So many of you have seen previews of
Can
this.
you pull the mic closer to you so that people at home can hear you?
Oh, perfect. Thank you. So many of you have seen previews of this. We have previewed it a couple of times with the working group with Budget and Finance Committee, but this is particularly aimed at the governing board. And thank you very much for your question, because what we are looking for is feedback, right? That's what we really want. Today we're not making a a formal recommendation. But what we are doing is trying to develop the background and the structure for what we are considering going forward. So here's our current, we're looking at two aspects, right? So we're looking at the policy around the reserve study and the assets itself. That, as written, is perfect, right? That isn't something that we're really looking at. What we're really looking at is what is our investment strategy and what is the best investment strategy for, or one of the best for our particular needs. The current policy for investment strategy is preservation of capital, liquidity, and rate of return in that order. Now, those are good objectives, but what we're really looking at here is, one of the things is that equity investments are limited to 10% with 90% in fixed income. So the questions we've asked are these. Does our policy support our association's development? Are they the optimal objectives? Is this where we should really land? And are we properly evaluating both our long-term and short-term needs and our needs for liquidity on a short-term basis? So here's the thing, this is a conservative policy, and it's in line with policies that are in place at most HOAs. This is not most HOAs. This is more like a fairly significant business, okay? A fairly significantly sized business. We don't have $100,000. We have $30 million approximately in our reserve fund at this time. And we need to look at it and manage it as a significant investment. And we have to be aware of the time frame, right? What is the time frame that we are utilizing this asset? So, our evaluation process today. So we modeled out the cash inflows and outflows under the current policy. We were provided with that information with our finance team. So that includes everything in the reserve study over a period of 20 years and includes a modeling out of the inflows and the outflows. We looked at it first from the current policy, and then we developed alternative scenarios and compared those to our current policy. Then what we did to make sure that the assumptions that we are using from an investment standpoint were valid, we gave that information to CapTrust, our investment advisor, and said, these are the scenarios we'd like to see you model out so that we could validate our assumptions. We had to see, did what we do make sense within parameters that our professional advisors would use. So we gave them that feedback, asked them to model it, and we received their feedback in return. So today, what we'd like to do is review those scenarios and CapTrust report back to us and receive input from the governing board so that we begin to formulate what those policy revisions should look like, and we can begin the process of our recommendation. So here's the baseline model and the alternate scenarios that we modeled out. So it's a 20-year model, and what we used, again, is what our own finance team uses in their 20-year modeling of our capital expenditures and what we expect, and the sources of funds. So the sources of funds, main sources of funds, are asset preservation fees, the annual allocation from our operations, from dues, annual allocation, and investment income. The scenarios that we used were 10% equity and 90% fixed income, which is what is currently in the policy. Then we modeled out 20%, 25%, and 30% equity. We actually did other models. We modeled it out further, but those are the ones that we really focused on. And each of those, the balance is in fixed income, whether it's in very short-term fixed income or longer-term fixed income in bonds. Investment returns, as we modeled them out, are based on the last 20 years. What we actually did is that we looked at the last 20 years of returns for equity, for bonds, and for treasuries. And that's what we modeled out every single year. So what we ended up with is, you know, the ups and downs that you would see in the market, as opposed to kind of an average. We actually modeled ups and downs so that we could see, and we could also demonstrate what this looks like in a changing environment, because every year we are going to have ups and downs. So over the first 10 years, this is a very heavily capital intensive period of time. We do all of our golf course projects, irrigation projects are done in this 10-year period. And after that, and in that period of time, our annual funding covers, so annual funding, not including any changes, but with the 10%, it covers about 90% of that, whoops, I'm a little hand talker, so it covers about 90% of our outflows in that period of time. And what that means is, that doesn't mean, hey, it's great, it covers 90%. What that means is we don't have to rely on short-term investments in the reserve fund. Most of what we spend every single year for the next 10 years, 90%. For the 20 years, it's 110%. So our inflows, for the most part, cover our outflows. That is very important from an investment standpoint, because what it means, the need for significant amounts of additional liquidity in your investment policy is limited. Okay, so now we're going to go and look at our outflows. So what we include, and this again is right from our finance team. So our anticipated spend, 85% is what is in the reserve fund. We also each year have an amount that is set aside for new capital. So that amounts to about 15%. It's about $1.4 million per year. Now that could be, doesn't mean that you spend $1.4 million per year, but what it can be is that you spend $200,000 one year, you could spend 2.8 the next year, right? So that's kind of what that looks like. So there is a piece in there for new capital, but it's not significant. This is what our cash needs look like, and this is what kind of, what is a little bit amazing about this. So in our first 10 years of this projection, our cash needs, our cash outflows are $96 million. So you look at that and you say, $96 million, we should have every single bit of our investment fund should be in cash equivalents. Well, that's not really true, because when you look at this deficit with 10% equity strategy, most of it is covered by our inflows and investment income. So over this period of time, what you need in cash can be covered by 15 to 20% of your reserve in cash-like. So treasuries, money market funds, CDs, things of that nature. So then, and then over the next 10 years, our cash needs are reduced from 96 to 81 million, because we've completed, it's still significant, right? Still significant, but we're through our big projects at the golf courses. And then in that period of time, we actually are in a cash surplus for the next 10 years. So over the 20 years, we are covered 90%, and the second 10, more than 110. So these are our base assumptions. Net cash flows in years 1 through 10, because this is the critical piece. It's 16 million, but that is 16 million before investment income. When you add in the investment income, it drops to the $5 million. Okay. So this is cap trust model. As you see, it's very flatlined in the first 10 years with some little ups and downs like this. Well, those ups and downs are because of the differences in the amount of our capital that is spent. You have bigger years and less, kind of goes a little bit like this. And you will see, because we spend so much of our capital in that period of time, there's not a great deal of room for increases in our reserve fund during this period of time, because it is high outflow, right? High outflow, and we manage to that. One of the things that we have looked at with the finance team is the fact that on a 5-year basis, they're already managing to what that need for cash flow is, right? So we're already managing that. And that is critical to our investment policy. And then you see after year 10, under the various scenarios, it's going up under capped trust model. It's going up very nicely. But you still have the 64 million at the end of, in 20 years versus 71 million if you were in the 10 and the 30%. So there's a difference there. So if we could look at our model. So here's the working group model. The working group model isn't quite as, it doesn't go straight up, because in real life, this isn't going to go straight up. It's going to have ups and downs. But what this shows you, and we're actually going to go to the next slide, this will show you the comparison is they actually end up in the same place. It's just, and why this is important. You end up in the same place if you are diligent in your investments. And by diligent, what that means is that you actually you keep to your investment strategy. If we don't keep to our investment strategy, if we do things like panic and sell when the market goes down, you don't give the market a chance to recover. This really shows you what happens in real life is you have ups and downs, and then the market goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down, it goes up. And if you maintain your investment policy, that cap trust, it says chart title, that's actually cap trust, that's a little bit of a sanitized version, but what we wanted to show you is that the sanitized version and the real life version look the same, right? So they look the same. But again, and they both show that in the first 10 years, we are going to be relatively flat, but your opportunity for growth in that next 10 years is pretty significant. If we look at a little bit of a change in our allocations. Okay, here's our projected reserve fund versus the fully funded balance. Fully funded balance is very important because what we are required by policy to keep and has been with our reserve study with the professionals that we use, they have recommended that we have at least 40% in our fully funded balance, which means that the amount of your reserve fund is equal to or greater than 40% of your fully funded balance. So that's where we're at right now, right? So we are in that 40% range and it stays there, but with our projected, with the increases in both over time and even at the lowest rate, that fully funded balance is going to go up over this time, right? So we will go up to, in our modeling, about 57% under 10% equity and about 74% of the fully funded balance if you go up to 30%. Okay, so let's go on. So this is the summary. This is a comparison of where Cap Trust landed and where we landed. And what is interesting here is that they look very similar, and in fact, they're basically equivalent at the 25 and 30% levels of equity. What's really interesting, and they're both more conservative than the historical gross index return. Cap Trust gave us their report at our last meeting, and they measure themselves against the indexes, right? So you look at the indexes for the various areas that we are invested in, and they look at what our return is and what the index was. So what you can see is that that's the historical return. We are projecting still conservatively that it would be not as good as that. But what's really interesting is if you look at that historical standard deviation, so that standard deviation of 5.7 under 10% and 6.8 under 30%, thank you, that is not a big difference. So we reviewed this with Cap Trust, and what was interesting to all of us is that we can go from 10% to 30% without a gigantic increase in risk. That it really, it's just not a gigantic, it's not a gigantic increase in risk. So if you look at this too. So,
Excuse me.
yes.
Can you speak into the microphone? Because
Yes.
as you turn away, it kind of
Yes.
fades in and out.
Yeah, I will try to do that. I'm trying to look at you guys and so. Yeah. So, in fact, maybe I'll do this a little bit. Can you hear me? Okay. All right, perfect. Thank you. So here's the thing too to look at. So the second part of this chart, 1 in 40-year estimated return. That is, so Cap Trust, let me just explain. So Cap Trust, when they give us their findings and a certain percentage, what that is, they actually run 1,000 different scenarios. And they're all equally possible, but what it gives you is a very wide range of possibilities. This is the possibility, it's sort of at the average, it's at the median. So you could expect that this is in the sort of middle of the road, not too high, not too low range. That is what they gave us. The range of possibilities, of course, are wider than that, but this is the median. I described it at the last meeting as a bell curve and was told maybe people don't understand bell curve, but what that means is that the vast majority of the returns are in this middle of the road. This is where they land. So, but they also model out 1 in 40 year, which is a 1 in 40 year chance of return is 2.5%. A 1 in 20 year return is a 5%, right? That's what that means. So 1 in 40 years, 2.5% chance, you could have losses in every scenario, right? And you could have, when you look at the 1 in 20 year return, what's interesting is they're about the same across the board. 2%, 2.2, 2.1% at 30. Annual returns above 0. At 10%, it's 87%. It's 82.5 at 30%. That is not a big variation. And the other really interesting thing is when you look to months to full recovery from the prior peak, that actually goes, so what that means is how long does it take you to get back to where you were before the loss? How long does that take you? So under the 10%, it takes you 40 months. Under the equity scenarios, it actually goes down because equity recovers faster. This is something that we saw just recently in 22. So in 22 was an unusual year in that bonds had the worst year that has been seen in forever. So bonds were down 13%. We experienced that. Equity was down 18%. So you look at that and you say, well, equity was down more. Yes, it was. Equity, as measured by the S&P 500 over the next 2 years, went up 25% and 23%. So it more than recovered in the first year. Bonds were down 13%, and they went up about 5% and 5%. We're fortunate in our portfolio here with Cap Trust, we actually have recovered, but the index itself has not recovered yet. So if we had had a different mix, chances are we would not have recovered from that as of yet. So this is partly to really talk about the fact that equity is an appropriate investment for the long term. it recovers faster and delivers more, and your standard deviation, your chance of bigger risk in these different variations is not very high. All right, so considerations for change. So in looking at this, Rick and I, as advised by both the finance team and Director Novello, we have looked at this, and we believe that the current investment strategy is unnecessarily restrictive. And here's the reason for that. The restrictions they don't match our cash needs. If you look at, can we just go to the next one for a second? One more. So I'm going to preview this piece. Investment of assets should match your timing of cash needs. So you will often hear people say, investors, commentators, you should have a 60-40 split. You should have a 50-50 split. As you get older, you should have a, 70% bonds, 30%. People say that. Well, that's actually inaccurate. There is no one size fits all, even for a particular age group. What really matters is that you invest depending on your cash needs. If you need the cash in less than 5 years, and we here at the association do a really, really good job of understanding what our cash needs are in 5 years. Under 5 years, no risk tolerance. So what that means is if I need it in 5 years, I don't want to have any principal risk. I don't want to take losses. I want those to be in treasuries. I want them to be in money market funds. I want them to be in risk-free assets so that when I close those out to pay for capital expenditures, that we're not going to have any losses. 5 to 10 years, you can have more risk, but you're still looking for a relatively low risk. What that means is that describes bonds. If you don't need it for 10 years, you can have more risk tolerance. That means equity. So now if we could go back. So that's what we're saying. More equity exposure is appropriate for long-term investments. And when we model it out, really, most of what we need is in the over 10 years. Because if you keep 15 to 20% in a cash risk-free type of investment, most of the rest of it is not going to need to be used. So what we're talking about here is just giving us a little more equity exposure. Not all of the equity exposure, but some equity exposure so that it's both appropriate and helps us with our investment returns. So here's the thing. Our current investment strategy is, it works. It has worked fine, but it keeps up with inflation, but just barely. It kind of limps along like this. So under the current strategy, we are positioned to meet all of our scheduled outlays, our repairs, replacement, but there isn't much cushion for if we have unplanned expenditures or strategic investments. And that's what we really looked at is, what if we have strategic investments that we'd like to look at? What if we wanted to do that? If we don't do something like this, if we don't have a little bit more cushion in our reserve fund, anything strategic will have to be funded outside of this. That means special assessments, other things of that nature. So, and there's a risk. This is one of the things I really want to stress, is that there is a risk to staying with the current strategy, because if you are looking at 90% fixed income, it is easy for your portfolio of assets, the value of those to erode over time and not keep up with inflation. So as an example, from the time period from 2008, the housing crisis, through 2016, for 8 years, the treasury rate, which we're talking about, the risk-free treasury rate, hovered around 0 for 8 years. So if our strategy is a fixed income strategy and you have your investment returns at 0, you will not keep up. Oh, am I? Okay, thanks very much. So that's one of the things that you really have to look at. And yes, we did have an unusual occurrence in 22 where the bond market fell 13%, but that is what happens that's what happens when interest rates drop, right? That's what happens. And so we could see that again. So these are the association's stated ideals. The association will adopt sustainable economic policies that ensure both short-term and long-term financial health, supporting the needs and enhancing the lifestyle of current and future members. The association's amenities, operations, and infrastructure will be maintained to modern and attractive standards consistent with the community's original intent. Resources will be allocated to ensure we remain efficient, attractive, and competitive with newer developments, okay? Changing our investment strategy will help us keep with these ideals. They will allow us to have a little bit more money in the bank to fund strategic investments. So we recommend a change in our investment strategy. We think that our strategy should have an equity range. Currently, the strategy is 10% equity, and there is no range. So what that means is if you have a little change in value, and now it's 11% this month. What that causes is that you don't have any room for valuation changes and to adjust to those perhaps over time. What it means is that you end up rebalancing more often than you would want to. So we recommend that there be a range of acceptable equity investments with a target. Preservation of capital should have a component that addresses short-term and long-term cash needs. So at this point, we just say preservation of capital. Well, preservation of capital, that doesn't mean that you have to have all of it in risk-free investments. Preservation of capital over time is also important. So if you can't preserve your capital over time because you've stuffed your money in the equivalent of a mattress, the value of that it's going to decline over time. So that's where we get to this. The investment of our assets should meet the time frame for those assets when they will need to be utilized. And we also think that our policy should address the need to stay the course, which is to come up with an investment policy and stick with that investment policy. Here's the issue, is that if we emotionally react to changes in the market, it is invariably the wrong time to make a decision. When the market goes down, and this is a conversation I had with my husband, oh, please, please, sell. And I said, this is not the time to sell. This is the time to buy. What we do is that we wait it out. And if you don't need the money, you have the time to wait it out. So if you have an investment policy that is well thought out, that over time meets your needs as our association, then you stick with that policy. And we do think that that should be a key component of this. As I said, so reacting to short-term losses. So we've talked about short-term losses. They're really unrealized losses. So If you don't sell it, it's not a realized loss. It is a change in market valuation. So let's not react to changes in market valuation. Let's keep our investment policy where it is and allow it to do what it needs to do. Because when we emotionally react, it leads to suboptimal results. So we want your feedback. That's what we're looking for.
Thank you so much.
Hold on, please, Dennis. Everything goes through the president. So the purpose of this here is that this is a preview. This is what the working group has been working on, and this is what they've come up with to date. What they're looking for from us is a clear idea. Let me get my notes here. A clear idea of what is an acceptable proposal for our investment strategy. We're not here to solve it and set it today. That's not what we're here to do. We're here to give them feedback on something that they might look at in the future. They're looking for direction. They've taken it as far as they can. They now need direction. So for the board members, the purpose of this session, of this part of the presentation now, is for us to ask questions and to think about giving them some direction at the end of this. So with that, Director Horvath, if you'll kick us off.
Well, first of all, thank you for that. That was excellent. A question that comes up a lot is a lot of times capital preservation and fixed income are interposed. So can you define that exclusively? Because we're in capital preservation for 90%.
Correct.
But you're saying that does not mean fixed income.
No, it does not mean fixed income. So when you look at, say, fixed income, unless you were invested in the bonds themselves, not in a fund. And the thing is that most pools of assets are invested in funds because they're less risky overall. If you're invested in any one bond, you are subject to the risks inherent in that company itself. And so in our policy, we don't invest in individual stocks. I don't think we can invest in individual bonds because they're risky. And so here's the thing is that with bonds fluctuate in value just like stocks do. So what we saw in 22 is the interest rate went from 0 up to 5%, and your principal risk, so the value of those bonds goes down because they were at 0. Now you have to extrapolate a 5%, and so you lost 15%. So fixed income, as I said, is not risk-free. Now, it is perceived to be less volatile, and it is perceived to be less risky, but there's the risk of default, there is the risk of interest rate changes, so it isn't completely risk-free. It isn't. So when you look at risk-free, so the risk-free rate, those are treasuries. That's what they are. And you can invest in treasuries. We can invest in treasury funds. So you then are subject to the risk-free rate, which over the past 20 years has averaged 1.6% over the last 20 years, including that 8-year period of 0. So going forward, maybe it will be better than that. But again, bonds are not risk-free, and they are not completely exempt from principal risk.
One other question So that explains the 4.1 million loss last year.
In 22, I believe.
Yeah,
right?
or
Was it
22.
I think it was 22.
Yeah, because I know a lot of owner members are interested in what the heck happened there. Thank you.
So, great. So this is, and we've been talking about this. So valuation change at that time. So that was a valuation change. It went from here to here in terms of market valuation change. Over that period of time, so that did not turn into a realized loss. The valuation has come back up over the last 2 years, and now the valuation is about, I think we're pretty close to break even, yes? Okay, with the investment income and the valuation change, right? So that's where we are there. So that is kind of interestingly, people probably or may not have realized that was a bond-related loss. It was not an equity-related loss. It was a bond-related loss. Now, it can, we can say that was unusual, but what I can tell you about my 40 years in this business is that every year is unusual. Okay, just.
So are you saying then that because that valuation change hit us and was a paper loss,
Yes.
that if we had not had a 90-10 mix, we might not have had experienced as much as it has? Is that what I'm hearing?
So I'll give you just the little background on that. So you still would have, so say for example, we had gone to a 30-70 split, not 90-10. You would still have had 70% of that loss, right? So not 90%, but 70% of that loss. And then you would have had a different loss on your 30%. Now the difference is, and we show this, is with a little bit more equity, we would have participated a little bit more, and certainly not 100%, but we would have participated a little bit more in the rebound in equities. And so one of the things that equities do for you, if you are patient, if you have a long time frame, is that equities tend to rebound in a shorter period of time.
Well, exactly, and that was why I asked the question.
Yes.
Because we still would have experienced a loss, whether
Yes,
it
we
was
would have.
90-10, 10-90.
Correct.
Regardless of what happened. And the valuation change is what was kind of causing people to panic
Correct.
a bit.
And
by our 10% equity, 90% bonds, we took a bigger hit because of our policy.
correct. So looking at the other side of that, if you had been very aggressively, which we would not recommend, but if you'd been very aggressively, not in this, but in other portfolios, the rebound, you would have had a bigger loss, but not as big as you would expect. So 13-18, bonds went down 13, stock went down 18. It's usually not that close together, but from 22, if you'd been really aggressively invested, the rebound was significant, right? Really significant. We're not looking at that. That would not be appropriate for this portfolio, but we do think that a higher component, still conservative, right? So this 30-70, if we look at it in terms of, what I've told you, investment advisors sometimes will say, I think that this is the appropriate. So that 30-70% split is one that Schwab says is appropriate for people over 80. So it's a pretty conservative. It is still a quite conservative mix, but it does allow for, over 20 years, it would allow our association to accumulate $16 million more dollars. 57 to 74.
Any other questions? Oh, yeah, Director Novello.
I've had plenty of opportunity to ask questions, but
Yeah.
just to ask you to reemphasize some of the things that you mentioned about this is we're not in any crisis mode,
No.
right? We've had some, every company, every association's had good years and bad years, right? But on balance, our association, our team has done a really good job, together with investment managers, together with governing boards past, done a really great job of managing to those overall ideals. We have a really good reserve study that is capably managed, and it really puts us head and shoulders above others. So we're not in any immediate crisis. I believe to paraphrase you, what I've heard you say and what I've seen myself is that this is an opportunity to improve,
Yes.
right? We're not, the working group and the Budget and Finance Committee doesn't see something that is urgent, but it's timely because our general manager has just kicked off within the past few months our long-awaited strategic planning effort, resuming that, I should say. It's not that it wasn't happening, but resuming that, renewing it, and taking us forward. So this is an appropriate time to have this conversation about putting a little bit more money in the bank should we come up with a strategic initiative that we don't currently plan. Yeah?
Well, and here's the thing is that, so to echo Director Novello, so when we looked at this, it is clear to us that this is an extremely well-managed part of the association, from the reserve study, the way it's managed, the way they look at everything, the way they model it out, all of that. It is extremely well managed. And so that's not the point here. That is not what we're looking at, that it's not well managed. That's not what we're looking at. But we look at it as an opportunity. And one of the things that has come up time and time again is that we want to look towards the future. What does the future look like? What are some of the strategic investments we may want to make in this association to keep the association vibrant, competitive, and attractive? That's what we're really looking at. This is a way, and Rick can chime in, one of the things that we really want to look at is how do we help that? How do we help that going forward? And so that's one of the eyes. We're not looking at this just to say, I think you could do, I think I would change this policy. We're really looking at it from the perspective of what would make sense, what is still reasonably conservative, and it could really potentially help the association's strategic objectives.
And you look at this, I'm pretty simplest. There's a lot of financial details in here, and it can get kind of confusing sometimes. But realistically, if you look at the reserve fund and the reserve, that is our community's 401k, Social Security, and pension program all tied up in one. The answer and what we're looking for is we want to preserve that. We know the government now keeps kicking the can down the road about making changes to Social Security. Well, we're saying, let's be proactive and do it with our funds, because this is the way we'll ensure that the community will be well taken care of in the future. So,
Director Hurley?
Yeah, thank you. I have a couple questions, so bear with me here. You say the source of funds are asset preservation fee, annual allocation, and investment income.
Correct.
In your model, how much increase did you have for asset preservation fee year over year?
So I'm going to leave that to Cliff. Actually, did the model. They modeled that.
So the asset preservation fees are modeled out at 1,100 transactions, and then with a 3% increase per year in the APF fee.
Okay, and what about the annual allocation?
The annual allocation is modeled out at 7.5% of membership dues.
And increase per what?
So at this point,
dues are increased at 4% per year.
4%. Okay, thank you. All right. I have a couple other questions, and I think I just forgot them. I understand strategic investments, but give me an example of an unplanned expenditure that wouldn't be covered by insurance.
I think I think the unplanned expenditure would be a new capital project or enhancement based on changing demographics or something like that. So not a reserve study item or a catastrophic loss that would be covered by insurance.
Okay, and in the risk for staying the course, you say erosion of invested asset values, right? Wouldn't rebalancing the account take care of that?
Not with 90% fixed income, no.
It would do it at 20 or 30?
It would be better. It would be better. If you look at fixed income, right? So you look at 90% fixed income. And this is what so we had at our last meeting, we had Cap Trust actually came in and kind of gave their viewpoint. They will not advise us on what it should be, but they will advise us on what others do and things of that nature. And so as our advisor said, you can optimize your portfolio and reduce risk through your asset mix by diversification. At 90-10, as he said, we're not really diversified. And so you are totally at risk of the interest rate market, totally at risk, except for 10%. And as I said, what we've seen over the last 20 years, so at 20 years, risk-free rate of return at 1.6% does not keep pace with inflation.
That was for treasuries, though, right?
That's for treasuries, which at 90%, if you're looking at risk-free.
No,
right?
no.
So I'll tell you though, what bonds were over that same period? 3.1% over that same period of time, 3.1%. And that about keeps up with inflation, but not quite. So that's what we're talking about. And if you had another lengthy period of time, like that 8 years of 0%, you do not keep up with inflation. That's really the issue is fixed income. The nature of fixed income, is that you are being compensated for time value of money. Time value of money is related to inflation, which is why in the 80s, when inflation was rampant, you had mortgage rates of 19%. So that's the thing. Fixed income, by its nature, is designed to about keep up with inflation. That's all it does.
Okay, I didn't understand the thing you said.
Did anybody else?
Yes, I did.
Did anybody else? So that's kind of the.
That's it. That's it for me.
Okay.
Director Horvath?
One thing I definitely think we should look at is a range.
Yes.
But if you said that Cap Trust would not advise us as where we should be, if we go to a range of say 30-70 or 70-30 to 90-20, do we adjust that in? When would we adjust that?
So the range is a range, and I would probably say a range of plus or minus 10% of whatever the target is. So what we are suggesting is that there should be a target with a range, right? So a target with a range. So they would manage to the target. What the range gives both the governing board and Cap Trust is if there are changes in value and market value that are, right, it gives them, they don't have to react. So for example, the very first investment, when they gave their investment results, one of the things they said is that, we're a little bit off that 10%. And you could tell that they were bothered by that a little bit. We're a little bit bothered, we're a little bit off that 10%. The 10% doesn't give them any room for, and variations happen daily, month to month. What it would allow them to do is have or any investment advisor that we might choose, it gives them the ability to not have to rebalance continuously. It gives them more time. Say then, most portfolios probably balance twice a year, right? They could balance quarterly and get back to the range. But that's what we would look at. We would not look at them to say, within this range, here's where we're going to land. We would suggest a target with a range.
Yes.
So I'd be interested to, and it's probably in Cliff's report, but what do we pay Cap Trust a year? And if we had to if we had to have adjustments because we were a little bit off the 10%, does that cost us more?
So what?
Before you answer, can I ask that the conversations in the audience be kept to a minimum? It's disturbing up here. Thank you.
So, and I'm going to I will answer and Cliff can weigh in as well. So we pay them about $58,000. Is that right? 58, 60, something
Correct.
like that. So if you look at $30 million, 58, it's a bargain. It's not at market. It is if we went with someone else. And here's what we said. We specifically asked them the question when we went to them and said, please model these out. And one of the questions we asked was, what would our fees, if we have a higher equity percentage, what would our fees go to? And they said, your fees won't go up. This is our fee. So that is, it would allow, they certainly would be, now they invest in bond instruments. This gives them the opportunity to invest in a higher percentage of equity instruments. But all they did when they did the different scenarios, they took their current, they now have a profile of what they invest in. So you're diversified across your equity. They would just increase those same investments to meet 20%, 25%, or 30%. That's what they would do. That is what they told us they would do.
Thank you.
Director Chatton?
Yes, I did have a comment online, but I believe Cliff has already answered that. They were interested in what kind of increases were factored in and all this. My question is, this is all based on our current capital expenditure plans that we have, is that correct?
Yes.
So an opportunity comes along next year, it's not in the capital expenditure plan, it's nowhere in the budget, it takes $5 million to take advantage of this opportunity. How does that impact this plan that we would have going forward?
I can answer that. Essentially, we would look, if that were to happen in the short term, we do model out $1.4 million per year in new capital. So we would analyze that for a period of time and say, okay, instead of 1.4 per year, for example, we're going to take all that in 1 year and not have any new capital down the line. So that would be one component. We could look at the reserve study and say, move an irrigation project down the line.
Right.
That could be something that we do. We could analyze the reserve study and say, okay, we're going to subject that to inflation for another year, but if there's a greater need on a strategic item that we have to do, we would look at it that way. But the money has to come from somewhere, right? And I think that's your point.
Yeah, I agree, and I just think that, the better the equity position we can take, the more chance we would have of recovering such an expenditure. So, thank you.
Yeah, I'll say that the current strategy is the current investment strategy for the reserve fund. Their target is a 4.6% return over time. So this strategy that has been presented changes that and makes that a greater return, which then it's, I don't want to say it's free money, but it's more money in return.
Director Pyskowski?
Okay, so if we did decide to change our equity, and that would mean what, that they would have to sell bonds or bond funds to get to the equity position that we were, because, no, I mean, we'd have to sell bond funds to get to that, correct?
They would have to remix the portfolio.
We would
Right, they'd have to remix
yes.
the portfolio. With that said, was it last year that we lost $800,000 because we had to sell to go to the Capitol? I mean, I want to just make sure if we do this, that we're not going to sell something and lose money just to make it for our policy.
So, yes, so, and they have also asked us, if we go to a new investment policy, what's the time frame, right? So what is the time frame that you would like to see it happen? And as I said, they will not advise, so they will not market time. That's not their job, right? They will not market time. They will do what we ask them to. And what we said was, we think that it would be a good idea is to execute it over time. Say, for example, a year-long period, right? That you would, over a year, you would actually go from where we are today to the target at the end of a year. And they would definitely look at the investments to make sure that we didn't have realized, because that we weren't taking realized losses to do this. That also allows us that over time period. It also allows you not to put kind of all of your equity increase in one basket at one time. It allows you then to go, but they also, like they said, we're not going to say, oh, the market's down today, so we're going to do this, or the market's up today. They said, we will do it if you direct us to do it over time. We're going to do it on the first trading day of the month, or the 15th, or the last, whatever we talk about, and they will do that over a 10 or 12-month period.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so the bond funds, they're funds, and when we sell them on the stock trade, right? Is that correct?
The bond funds are, do we have mostly ETFs?
Yes.
Okay, so we have mostly ETFs, yes. So they can be, the difference between a mutual fund and an ETF, is that what you're kind of looking for? Okay. So the difference between a mutual fund and an ETF is that an ETF is an exchange traded fund. What that means is that it can be traded during the day. So at noon, I can trade that. A mutual fund closes once a day at the end of the day. So at the end of the day, what I do is with an exchange traded fund, I can put an order in and I can sell it and I will have my cash. With a mutual fund, I will put my order in. It will sell at the market value at the end of the day as determined by the fund, and it will settle the next day. That's the difference. They are not, it's really just timing during the day that you can trade during the day. It is, you still have that same box of securities that you're selling. So for example, there are many S&P 500 ETFs. There are many S&P 500 mutual funds. They have about the same return. It is simply how they settle. One's at the end of the day, one can be traded during the day.
But they are traded on the stock.
They are.
They are. So it depends upon what they can get at the stock market for that bond. Is that correct?
Yeah, during the day. Yes.
During the day.
During the day.
So if we have, I'm just trying to understand it. So if we have, let's say, a bond that's worth $50,000, that's our investment, and they go to sell it, and there's no bidders, or they can't sell it. They can't sell it for more than $50,000. They can only sell it for 45. Is that our loss?
So that won't happen.
That won't happen.
That
Okay.
won't happen. ETFs are big, huge exchange-traded funds. They are highly liquid. They are more liquid than the individual bond. As I said, the only difference, the only difference is that they can settle during the day. You're not going to have a situation where there are no bidders.
Okay.
That is not going to happen. It is not like an individual bond. It is not like an individual stock.
Okay.
It is a basket, just like a mutual fund. The only difference, and frankly, the difference between settling at the end of the day and settling in the middle of the day over time is negligible.
Okay, then my question is, how did we lose $800,000?
I don't know.
Okay, so it's not $800,000. We liquidated our reserve fund because we had to fund our operating account after we paid for our irrigation project at Grandview. That resulted in about a $600,000 realized loss because we had to liquidate those. But we liquidated those and put them in short-term treasuries while we waited for that transfer to happen, which generated approximately a little over $100,000 in revenue. So it's really a $500,000 loss. So, but yes, we did sell those, and those did experience a realized loss. And you can have realized losses. I mean, if you sell, you're subjected to that for sure.
So I'd like to amplify on that for just a second. So yes, so you had that loss, but this is one of the things. So this goes to another component that we have suggested for this reserve policy, and that is that if it's needed under 5 years, is that it goes into treasuries, that we go into zero risk. That is not part of the policy now. And so what you had was a longer term asset, a bond fund that did have a loss. We would suggest, we have had this conversation, is that we would suggest that you have a 5-year modeling out of cash and you keep your 5-year cash requirement in treasuries, in treasuries or treasury-like, right? So that they are
It's readily available.
So it's readily available and it
Without a
doesn't
risk.
without risk, right? So that's another key to it, because I think it's very critical that you look at your investment strategy in terms of when you need it. If you need it in 5 years, it's over here. You need it in 10 years, it's over here. You don't need it for more than 10 years, it can be over here. But that's, and as Cliff said, this is not going to alleviate every single loss. That is not the case. It won't alleviate every single loss, but it will help to alleviate short-term losses when you need liquidity, right? I think that is, when you need liquidity, we would like to see the policy indicate that those should be kept in cash-like treasuries and things of that nature.
Okay, so if we do this and we go to more equity, that means that we're going to be in the stock market, right?
Correct.
Okay, so how does that work? I mean, we just give Cap Trust the okay to do it? I mean, do they run anything by Cliff or Christine to say, hey, we've got this bond fund, or we just take them? I mean, we just take them. We just say,
They manage the portfolio.
They
It's
manage the
detailed
portfolio.
in the policy that
So
the
they don't run anything by you, or they don't talk to you about anything?
they're
even
the
though they're buying-
experts on the
okay.
market.
So here's what I can tell you. So they are required, per the policy, to be diversified, right? It's required to be diversified, and you can't have more than what percent in one?
20%.
20%, and you can't have more than 20% in any one fund, right? In any one fund. And so if you look at the report from Cap Trust, they lay out all of the various funds that they invest in currently, today, with 10%. Their suggestion, what they have said is that that's how they would keep it diversified. And so all they would do is take this piece, instead of being 10%, would now be 20 or 30%. So it would be the same strategy with just a bigger bucket. They are not going to go after, and it's all fund related, right? It's all fund related. It's not risky, one-offs.
I think that's one thing that we when we talk about this, we have a portfolio, which is a mix of investment tools or mechanisms. We don't talk about a bond or a stock.
Correct.
We talk about a portfolio that is balanced. So we have to be careful when we talk about this. We're not just going to go out and pursue the hottest stock of the moment. Let's go out and invest in AI, and let's go out and invest in crypto, So I think we have to look at it's a portfolio that is managed as a totality rather than as individual stocks or bonds. Director Novello.
Just to sort of amplify, or if we needed to look at it as directors, I had to look up the actual number. That's why I'm sitting here typing. So it's in FY12, which is a very detailed and very well-written policy that I did not write, by the way. I'm just complimenting whomever wrote it. So 3.1.2, right? That gives very specific guidelines on what instruments are allowable. So it's to President Leary's point. There's nothing in there that would allow for the investment in something that would be outside of what we would say is an investment grade. All right. So you can go and read it. I'm not going to read it out here, but it's very clear on what we can do, and there wouldn't be some kind of a very risky investment or AI or any one particular investment. So if you're looking for it.
Dr. Hurley.
Yes, I just want to state the obvious, and that is this is a policy. Policies can be changed with a majority. Our board changes every 3 years. We don't have a mechanism to put a policy in place that cannot be changed. So 3 years from now, we could get people that come in and say, let's put it all in treasuries.
You are right.
Right.
You are correct.
Right. So that needs to be addressed.
Do you have any suggestions on how to address that?
I would think it would have to go before the members.
Bylaw.
Yeah, there's a bylaw. I'm sorry. There's I looked at that too, because it's not to say, first of all, by design, right? That's the reason why we have directors that are elected every year, and we have this. So that's a good thing, right? The turnover is a good thing. However, this is so important. You look at, I took a quick look at one of the bylaws. The bylaws are very clear on how the governing board approves our overall financial plan, which is included in there is a 5-year plan. So I would suggest we consider including this investment policy target as a part of that 5-year plan. That's one way to ensure the governing board is always involved in and making a very diligent review of that target.
Okay.
So it's tied to the approval of the budget, which still, it's up to the governing boards as they change over, but there's a very detailed method in there. And if we wanted to go beyond that, Director Hurley, we could consider it as a bylaw change, I would imagine.
If we did that, you're going from 3 years to 5 years. And one of their key recommendations is to stay the course.
No, that's not what I'm saying is a change in target could be included as a part of the same review that's done annually by the governing board. So that a governing board comes in and must at least consider that very, very carefully. And that vote must be done with a 6 votes of the governing board is required. That's all I'm saying. It's one way to give this change. It's one way to at least amplify the importance of making any change in the target. It does not stop the change in policy.
Right.
You are correct.
Right. I still see that, and we've had boards in the past that have taken an entirely different view of this. And if the strategy is going to work, and I appreciate all the work that's went into it, it's obviously very well detailed. And I'm glad, Director Novello, that you put together the work group to do this. I think it's a very worthwhile project to look at it. My only concern is that this good work could be undone.
And while we're not here to solve that today, it's a very important point. So, because everything could be unwound, annually even. Yeah, sure.
Thank you again. And a couple of quick things just to point out. Again, it's a great discussion that we're having here, and I'm so grateful to all of the directors, including those who are unfortunately not here. I know that you all put a lot of time into reading all this detail, reviewing a lot of past meetings, and many of you have attended the budget and finance meetings and updates, either virtually or in person. So I just wanted to thank you and point out for the residents who are here and anybody who's watching, this is our opportunity to question, because the directors generally do not get up at the microphone and ask questions during the committee meetings, generally. So this is a great conversation that we wanted to make sure that we could bring to you here and continue to ask those questions. So grateful for that. The other thing that I failed to do in my introduction is I'd like, I need to thank both Mickey and Rick and the entire Budget and Finance Committee for all the time that they're putting into this. All of our committee members put in a lot of time, working groups especially put in a lot of time that is not obvious. But in addition to all the professional advisory, I was very fortunate to have a lot of people volunteer to be members of the Budget and Finance Committee, and we have some extraordinary talent. Mickey, would you please give an introduction and help the rest of our residents who don't know you? Could you tell us a little bit about your background? You mentioned a 40-plus year, so
Yes.
give us a sketch, please.
So, so by training, I'm a CPA. I have degrees in economics and accounting, and I practiced as a certified public accountant for 5 years before I went into industry. Then I had a 15-year career at a publicly traded mining company where I went through all of the financial chairs from the lowest corporate, like a accounting manager, and I finished my stint there as the CFO in a male-dominated industry. And then I went to work I started my career at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I ended my career at PricewaterhouseCoopers. I spent the last 21 years as the director of finance for tax in the West region, which is the largest tax department of Pricewaterhouse outside of New York. I was responsible for 20-plus offices and a $1 billion budget. And that's where I ended. And I retired 5 years ago.
We're very grateful. Like, we have so much untapped talent in Sun City West, right? We're all equal because we're all resident owner members. Just really grateful. And I wanted to not only thank the team, but thank you for introducing yourself, giving a little bit more background as to your background and why this came so naturally to you.
Okay, so I'm going to ask the board here. Oh, we have a question. Before I leave the board, I'm going to ask Mickey and Rick, have we given you enough direction that you sought from us?
I think I have to say, so we sort of know where we're leaning, right? So we know where we're leaning. What we're really looking for is does this seem reasonable? Does our approach seem reasonable? And the thing is that we as professional financial people, because that's what we are, professional financial people, this seems like a no-brainer to us. However, we have to think about the needs of the community, what the community wants, what the perception is. That's what we're looking at from you, right? That's what we're looking at. And we are not going to come to you with a proposal that you are going to reject. We want to come to you with a proposal that you are on board with. And that is what we are looking for.
Okay, then based upon that, I'm going to ask this board for a consensus. Are we comfortable with the direction that this working group is going? I'm going to start with Director Horvath.
Absolutely.
Okay. Director Grom?
Yes, sir.
Director Novello?
Yes.
Director Chatton?
Yes.
Director Piaskowski?
Yes.
Director Hurley, sorry.
Can I make a comment?
Yes or no?
Yes. Wasn't that long ago that we were at 20%
Right.
Yeah,
during my tenure.
that's
yeah.
right. Okay, then, so hopefully you got your feedback. We have a couple questions. Before I go to the audience, I'm going to go to the online questions.
Yes, I have two questions from Debbie Johnson, 130208. Is it possible to invest new APF funds in the new investment and keep current funds in the current investment? Her second question is, I thought Pete Finelli was the association's liaison between Cap Trust and the association. Is this not correct? If not, what is his function for the association?
Cliff, would you like to answer those?
The APFs are in the reserve fund currently, so I'm not really sure. I'd have to get some more details into that question. That question really doesn't make sense to me. But the next question, as far as the liaison between Cap Trust and the association, it is the CFO. And obviously, we're going to leverage our employees the best way that we can to get the best result we can for the association. And Pete is on the team as the reserve study analyst, so he's involved with that process. I want to go back to, there's this perception that these investments are a single investment and that moves are made somehow to buy and sell these securities. They're not. Policy dictates a lot of what we do with our reserve fund, okay? We're mandated by policy, for example, to fund our operating account when we have a capital project. That has to happen, okay? It's not up for debate, all right? So we do that in a way that minimizes any type of realized loss that we could, okay? But it's not selling one stock, it's a bucket of assets, okay? So that's how it's done. I hope that answers the question.
And Cliff, is it fair to say regarding the first question about the APF funds, the old money and the new money, it's fungible. They're dollars.
Yes, and it's also important to note that the reserve fund funds the repair and replacement of our existing assets, but it also funds new capital, okay? New capital. And industry standard, you're doing well in your reserve fund if it's above 30%. And it was intentional that they made it 40%, I believe. It was before my time. But it also has to take into account new capital and enhancements, which is, again, part of what we're mandated to do. It's in our ideals to keep the place looking nice, not only with the existing assets, but making sure that we're planning for changing demographics and being competitive in the world.
So it's fair to say that, and maybe this isn't widely understood, but a budget, the general manager's budget consists of two very large buckets. There's the operating side, which funds the day-to-day expenses. We pay the bills, we pay payroll, those kinds of things. Then there's the capital side, which is the repair, maintenance, and building of any new capital items, structures, anything with a life over 5 years and cost more than $5,000.
Absolutely, and there's a slide I just presented at Torch yesterday that has a ecosystem of services that we provide here, and we have to fund operating and capital to accomplish all of those things. So yes, that is it. And thank you for giving me an opportunity to plug our capital budget presentation for Tuesday coming up.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Cliff. Yeah, did we cover all of the online questions and comments?
We did.
Okay, Director Horvath?
I think the question online was, if we change our investment strategy from where it is now, is it possible that the new money from the APFs can go into that particular strategy? Like, say it's 30-70 or 70-30, can the money we collect from the new APFs as people sell houses, can that go into the new strategy? I think that's the question.
Okay.
Yeah, well, the question is, but I think I'm going to try here is that, remember that Cap Trust will invest as we direct them to. So they will not make that decision. Cliff and his people will make that decision. And to Mickey's point, it could happen over time.
Yeah, so as we phase that in, there'll be a process for doing that. And then to answer your question on the funds, we currently do that, believe it or not. We recently funded our reserve fund account after last year's at approximately 2.3 million. And we directed them to invest that in short-term investments because we knew we're going to have a draw coming up this November or November of 2025. So we currently do that as managing those funds. So we make sure that we're managing based on the cash needs that we talked about earlier and what the net cash inflow or outflow is going to be.
Director Chapman?
I would also assume that the amount we get in APF funds may not be enough to transfer all that money. If we went from 10% to 30%, we probably wouldn't be able to do that in a year's span, if that's what we were given. Because you're only talking about, what, $10 million? And there'd be a lot more than that. So you'd still have to reinvest or change some other investments.
Yes.
Yeah, so if I can respond to that. So going from 10%, right, from 10 to 30% on a $30 million fund is going from $3 million to $9 million, an increase of $6 million. That is about what we bring in, a little bit less, but that's about what we bring in APF fees. Now, however, you would not want to restrict them to only using APF fees. That is too limiting. That would not allow you to make adjustments in the other portfolio. And it also this is a source of liquidity that we are counting on as a source of liquidity. And so I think that the better idea there is to say, we want you to do it over time, and that minimizes your one-time only risk, and it also gives them flexibility in choosing the appropriate investments to liquidate, because there will be investments from duration, from whether or not there's a loss, things of that nature that they can then choose. And as I said, that's $6 million coming in. That's a pretty significant source of our liquidity. So we do not want to, we would not, in my humble opinion, want to limit them to only using APF fees. But again, we are talking about, you look at it and you think, oh my gosh, 10 to 30. It's the difference between $3 million today and $9 million. That's what we're talking about over probably a year. And it could even be longer, right? It could be longer, but it is sort of up to, and that will not be policy. How you do it is not policy. How you do it is operational. So
yeah, it is a little dependent on policy, I will say, because policy dictates how we do that entry, and we fund our capital projects first with the cash we have.
Correct.
And we collect. So we can't just partition that cash out and put it in, because we have to fund our current year capital projects with the APFs that come in the current year.
Well,
So-
and that is a beautiful thing, okay? That is one of the things that gives us less risk in terms of your current situation. You're using your current source of liquidity to fund your current needs. So that's exactly what we want.
Okay, Director Novello.
And building on that, you touched on it already, but remember those, I can't remember which slide it was, and it doesn't matter, but it's there were 3 areas, and Mickey walked us through the working group's observation that near-term investment, what they are recommending is actually going to preserve that near-term capital even more for us. It basically puts into policy what our operations team strives to do all the time, right? Cliff gave a specific example of we the association, not me. The association knew we have this amount of money that we're going to be paying next fall. Therefore, Cap Trust, and I was present for this, right? But Cap Trust, you need to make sure that that money is available for withdrawal in November of 2025, or whatever the actual dates were. So this happens. We're not correcting an issue. We're making sure that, again, 50 years from now, to the best of our abilities, because this policy, if there's a policy change, could be changed again by next year. But to the best of our abilities, this would be our way of putting into policy the things that are good practice that are already happening today. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go to the audience. Do we have questions? I see a man patiently waiting his turn. Is your name and your record number, please?
Nick Turner, 1311829. The beautiful thing, as was just stated, I think is the key insight here, that the most of the capital needs for the next financial year are met by receipts that are coming in during that financial year, and that is what allows the greater risk tolerance for the fund, because we don't need that much of it in any one particular year. I think I also heard that if we'd had this 30-70 split, or a 30-70 split 2 years ago, the unrealized loss would have been much bigger, but the recovery would have been much faster, and it's likely that we would have had a higher valuation in the fund today if that situation existed.
That is correct. Yeah. And I would say not much bigger. It would have been a bit bigger, but your return would have been greater.
Yep, so we would have had even bigger community panic about the loss for a shorter period of time.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And the other thing is that I would suggest is a note of caution about tying the hands of the governing board and their ability to make changes in the future. I wouldn't want to see too many restrictions on their freedom of action. And the reason I say that is because I think we might be heading into some more volatile times. And, you know, I don't like the idea of raising national politics, but at the moment, we're in a background where there is political pressure to reduce interest rates against a background of policies which are likely to increase inflation. And those two things cannot coexist together without some hiccups. And therefore, there could be some volatile reactions to good or bad news as it occurs over the next few years. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Dave Bennett, 1378887. I'm not conservative necessarily in my own portfolio and stuff, but this is different. With a good strategic plan, we'll know how much money we need out quite for 30 years from now. And if you can get a rate of return in laddered CDs that more than covers that, I know you guys don't want to hear this, but if we had been in CDs in 22, we wouldn't have had a loss. There would have been compounded interest at whatever the rate was. It was between 2% and 5% during that time. And when you go to sell the laddered CDs, there wouldn't have been a loss recently. But I don't, all of this money comes out of our pockets and our APF. It's not like a retirement fund to me. We want this money to be there. The number one thing is preservation of the money. I think that should be the first two rules. I know all of you guys don't like this, but at the current, you can get 5% CDs laddered. And I understand the 8 years where there wasn't anything. Well, you make adjustments when that happens. If the interest goes way up, you can cash in a CD. There's a formula. How much it goes up, it's worth cashing in whatever the penalty is and reinvest it at a higher rate. You'll get it back relatively soon. Also, those penalties are institution. It's not a federal thing. Each institution has their own penalties, and you can negotiate those things if you got enough money. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments from the audience?
Jim Scott, 404675. I agree to disagree with the previous comment. To preserve the capital is absolutely utmost importance, but there's got to be a balance because you're losing money with inflation. If we're sitting with the 90-10 split, we're losing money. I mean, as Mickey did a wonderful, and Rick did a wonderful job explaining, we're treading water. I mean, just with a 90-10 split. It's got to be upped a little bit to take on a little more equity position in order to take advantage of the market for some long-term strategic opportunities perhaps, but more importantly, not to get taken out of the kneecaps with inflation. And the other comment about the laddering the CD, I agree, but we're talking $30 million and we're talking about the folks giving us managing it at $58,000 a year. To have a more active management team, we would be paying probably a more significant management fee as well. So there's a tick for tack with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, so I think Mickey and Rick, we've given you the direction that you need. Is that fair to say? Yes or no?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
I think so.
Okay, then with that, I thank you. We will move. So here's what I had thought. I had prepared my own expectations that might take an hour. It's taken almost an hour and 40 minutes. So at the risk of losing the audience, I'm going to say that we take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 11:08 in 22 seconds. And we will pick up with the agenda item number 303 because we got 11 more items to go. Yeah, very quick break. start. It's, I gave you an extra 40 seconds. So let's go to agenda item number 3.03, which is the B&F Annual Financial Plan key dates. Turn it over to Director Novello.
I will do my best to keep this brief, folks. So if we go to the first slide here, just a little bit of background. Each year, each committee goes through its overall key dates and roadmap. We presented this slide at Budget and Finance on September 3rd, which was our first meeting of the year, just like all the rest of our committees do, right, in terms of going over key dates. So all the difference here is that the big red arrow shows that we are here. We're in mid-February. And we're basically tracking, as you can see, 4, I would call them swim lanes, 4 rows. So Budget and Finance does all of the capital budget and operating budget work, of course, or our portion of that review. Then the second line down shows policy reviews, again, something that all our committees do. And then we also review some of our outside vendors for how are our investments doing, our audit reports every year, our health insurance, workers' comp, and property and casualty insurance renewals. So these are the timings so that we could lay out for ourselves what's going on in every particular part of the year. Now you can see that that top line for budgeting, that's something that pertains to all of us. So just wanted to dive in a little bit more to see for all of the committees and for Budget and Finance, where do we stand? So on the next slide, these are just some overall target dates for all of us to keep an eye on, not just Budget and Finance, but made it more generic across all of us. So first of all, just be aware that the capital improvement budget we'll be discussing it here at the April workshop. And again, this is all baked into our policies and bylaws, I believe. So we need to make sure that we're hitting some of these key dates. So each committee is going to be going through the process of recommending what we call a pull out. That doesn't mean removing things from the budget necessarily. It could be. Could also be something that we believe the governing board needs to spend more time discussing. So each committee does that, and Budget and Finance is planning to do that at our March 18th meeting. But if we run out of time, we will run out by April 1st. So you see the idea. Every committee is going to be hitting these dates. We'll make sure that we do that at our March 18th meeting or no later than our April 1st meeting, because we meet twice a month. The second area is our operating budget. We just talked about all these budget terms in excruciating detail, but the operating budget is our day-to-day operations, of course. Again, we're expecting to see this at the April 11th Governing Board workshop. That'll be where we get the review. And by May 9th Governing Board workshop, we will all be discussing what would be the final operating budget. Now, Budget and Finance, to give us a little plug, is we're going to have our first review of that budget next week at Tuesday's Budget and Finance meeting. So we'll get our first review of that, but that's just the first start. And we'll be going through several rounds, and specifically some of the departmental budgets will be reviewed. The Sports Pavilion Committee will be looking at that departmental budget in more depth at their March 12th meeting. The Golf Committee will be looking at the golf departmental budget at their March 13th meeting. Again, more detail. And the Budget and Finance Committee will make its recommendations. We expect to make those recommendations again at our March 18th meeting. But if there are any changes or any needs to pull that in, we will do it no later than April 1st so we can meet that April 11th date. Again, our governing board will be going through our budget review here at workshops April 11th, and our final budget approval is by the May 22nd full meeting. Lastly, on the investment strategy that we just heard about at length, we're expecting we'll make a recommendation or a series of recommendations to this governing board in this operating year. So certainly no later than the June 13th workshop, but we believe based on everybody's fantastic preparation, and again, thank you for that and feedback, we'll be seeing some of those recommendations earlier. So what we do with those recommendations is, of course, still up for discussion, but Budget and Finance Committee will be making our strategy recommendation, what the numbers will be, what the specifics. We'll be discussing that by our March 4th meeting, and that's our goal, certainly no later than April. And we will be making any policy recommendations and red lines at our March 18th meeting, April at the latest, so that we can get here to the governing board for discussion and review in order to make that end of working year deadline. So those are the three key dates to keep keeping an eye on from a finance perspective.
Anything else? No. Okay. Any questions for Director Novella from the board? Nope. Any from the remaining audience? Any questions from online? Okay. Thank you for that. Everybody should be clear on the dates. The next agenda item is a report from the Properties Committee. Chairperson and Director Kay Williams is unable to be here, but there is one item that her committee made a recommendation, and I hope Carl will cover this when he does his CIP presentation. The tennis club asked for a deferral of replacing the court, R.H. Johnson Tennis Court windscreens on courts 1 through 16, which is all of the courts. They feel that they are not required for replacement for a couple of years. So the committee is recommending, they reached consensus to defer that full $75K expense for the windscreens for 2 years at this time. So that's the report from the Properties Committee. And with that, I'll ask Carl to come up and talk about the February changes to the CIP budget.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Governing Board, members of the community. I'll keep this short. We do not have a lot of changes. This is the February iteration of the proposed capital projects list from the general manager. And in brief, we have our color block section, which is the outlay of the entire budget to date. We only had a few revisions. So in our new capital, we had no revisions. In our R&R for the recreation divisions of the rec centers, we had a few deletions that I'll go over in a few minutes, a few seconds, and we had one addition, which is the safety equipment AEE devices, 42 units for replacement, and I'll talk about that in further detail. Moving over to the R&R portion for landscaping departments and golf, no changes for the month of February, and no current changes to the allowance category of the budget. This is a portion of our color block that's just a little helpful for the directors of the board to understand the work that we have put into this budget early on before we ever even came to the table in September. And I'll start off with some of the items that were deferred. I'm not going to go into detail, but each year when we go over our R&R reserve study items, our assets, we deferred to date $1,137,000 to future years based on items that just are in really great condition, don't need them. We can get more useful life, and it makes sense in our R&R category. Sometimes inflation does not make sense to push these items out. But recently, in the last few months, we've had the softball electronic scoreboard. As you know, this governing board approved the funding from Liberty Buick to be the funding source for the softball's request for this new electronic scoreboard. That scoreboard is an asset of ours, so it was in our reserve study tool. And because that funding has been approved for this FY24-25 budget, it can be removed out of the proposed 25-26. So that $70,000 has been removed. And then a deeper dive with Russ Boston in pool circulation pump requirements. The Palm Ridge circulation pumps aren't needed for 25-26, so that 14,000 has been removed. I'm going to move over to the other part of the presentation, which is a little more detail and is also called our over $50,000 line items. You will see that our proposed capital budget, page 3, shows that our new capital is still proposed at $190,000. Our repair and replacement for the recreation departments is $2,052,377. Our repair and replacement for golf and landscaping is $2,714,776, and our allowances are at $520,000 for a total proposed capital budget of $5,477,153. All the committees for February have seen this presentation for the relevant items to their committee, and the Budget and Finance Committee has seen and heard this in its full entirety, as you are as well. I'll move forward with the one addition that was made in February, and that is in the recreation R&R area. Our AEDs have come under an advisement from the manufacturers to not make it a recommendation of their useful life, but an absolute. AEDs should be replaced now at a 10-year cycle, so we have changed our reserve funding to facilitate that. So we have approximately 54 AEDs, and 42 of them are older than 10 years. So we are proposing that they need to be replaced in FY25-26. In March, you will see that this price that I have at $68,000 will actually be $76,000. And the reason for that is based on our accounting principles, the trade-in value of $6,000 to $8,000 will offset that. And the actual expense in the end will be about $68,000. So, but for accounting reasons, we have to create the budget to show the true purchasing price. But this replaces all 42 of the 54 AEDs. It also gives us the opportunity to have the better AEDs for the future, which allow us to use the built-in Wi-Fi enabled technology for real-time visibility, tracking, and monitoring the machines. It's just a standard to these new replacements. And again, as I mentioned, there is a trade-in value. And then there is also potential that we do get this at a better price when we go out for alternate bids with other suppliers and vendors. And that's our only addition for the FY25-26 for February. If there are any changes that will be made for March, we'll make sure the committees have those changes, and you also, the governing board. Any questions?
Yeah. Any questions for Carl? No? Any questions from the audience? Any questions online?
Nothing online.
Nothing online. Okay, thank you, Carl. Appreciate that.
Have a good day.
Okay, then with that, we're going to go to the agenda item 3.06 about the club space expansion request. This is an update from Director Chapman.
A very quick update. We have had our first meeting, which I think was very productive. There were several questions brought up and additional information that had been sought. Right now, Casey Huda, our rec manager, is in the process of working with Carl and coming up with a new date. I believe there's been an email gone out and asking people to respond with the date that works for them. I don't believe we set up a new date yet, have we, Casey? Or we have? I have it on my phone, but I don't, my phone's back there. 27th, okay. 27th at 10 a.m. will be our next meeting of the 4 different clubs, and the staff will also be there.
Okay, any questions for Director Chapman? Any questions from the audience? Any questions online? It's you,
Carl.
John. Any questions online?
No.
Okay, then Carl has something that was overlooked.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback off of this, since we're talking about the committees. Yes, the Properties Committee heard the request from the club to have myself reconsider and take a look at the tennis windscreens at our facilities. That's a $75,000 proposed capital replacement. We certainly erred on the side of that the windscreens are in fair condition and kept them in our repair and replacement plan for 25-26. But thanks to the club and them sharing it with the Properties Committee, we are okay. General managers, CFO, and myself are okay with deferring that for a couple more years. So that will be removed from the March totals.
Anything else?
Nope.
Okay, thank you, Carl. Any questions? No? Okay, great. Well, moving on. I'll turn Director Chatton, if you can hit us up with agenda item 3.07.
I would start by asking if there's anyone from the Woodworking Club that's here today. We just want to lift up the Woodworking Club for the incredible conference room table that they had constructed for us. If you had never been in our conference room previously, you would not know it was just a series of rectangular tables such as these put all around. You had considerable distance between you and somebody you were probably talking to. It just was not a very good setup for that conference room. The woodworking shop was asked to create a table for us, and they did, and it is absolutely beautiful. I think, how many was it, 600 pounds or something that it weighs? It's just a beautiful table. It sits in there perfectly. We've used it a few times already, and just want to thank the Woodworking Club for all they did to provide that for the Sun City West Board. Thank you.
Okay, any questions for Director Chatton on that? Anybody? Okay, we'll go to 3.08, which is I'll turn this section over to Director Chatton. You could introduce what's going to happen.
You bet. In your packet, you will find a presentation that Nick Turner has prepared, as he and Vicki were the head of our committee, or not committee, working group that was looking at the RR&Ps to revise them for the current year. They have finished that, and the Chartered Clubs Committee has moved that to this working group to consider the revised RR&Ps. There's a long presentation that goes with it, but that's been included in the packets for the governing board, along with the latest revisions of the RR&Ps. I won't say any more than that, outside of the fact that at the regular board meeting next week, we anticipate a motion being made to accept those revised RR&Ps. So if there are any corrections or additions or things that the governing board would like to see, please get them to myself or Nick sometime during the next week.
Okay, so the onus is on us as directors to make sure that we read and understand the redlined RR&Ps and take a look at the presentation deck as well. That will, I'm sure, will explain the rationale behind some of those changes. So again, the onus is upon us to be prepared next week. Okay, then with that, we'll move to agenda item 3.09, the golf policy. Director Graham, will you talk us through that?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Our changes are quite a bit shorter. The working group that was established back in November concluded last Friday. And their task was to take a good look at policy G06, which is the administration of the tea time system. One of the elements under there was the group play, and they first assembled data from over about the last 10 years as to how golf operations was implementing the group play system. And what they determined was that, actually, as you can see, we're deleting section 1.3 and actually replacing it with a new section 1.3.1, which better defines why group play is actually conducted. Group play is here because this really provides a service to what we're calling our avid golfers. These are the people that play probably 50 times a year or more, and it's the real backbone of the community. So the the golf committee will review this policy and these changes at the March meeting. And then once it's accepted, we'll come forward to the governing board with a recommendation at the next governing board meeting.
Okay, great, thank you. Any questions for Director Grom? Okay, any audience online? Okay, I'll take that as a no. Okay, we'll go to agenda item number 310, facts and findings on the Mesa Well Pump replacement. Todd Patty.
All right, thank you and good morning. In your packet today, you'll find a facts and findings document for the repair of the Mesa well. Just to give you a little background, the well's been offline since about November, I think it was 15th, and at this time during that whole time, we've been receiving water from the Deer Valley well. It's actually a good time for a well to go down because we can take our time and get a good plan together for how we're going to repair it and what we're going to do because of the low demand for water this time of year. Now, if it was during the summer months, that would be a different story. It'd be just a flat-out emergency to get that thing back online again. So our pump company, Weber Water Resources, came out and did an inspection and found that the power cable had worn through and shorted out. That was due to a vibration in the pump. They performed a video of the well and discovered that the 3 holes in the well casing that will require patching, and they also found 13 sections of column pipe. Those are 8-inch by 20-foot column pipe that are corroded, and strongly recommended that those be replaced. To protect the power cable, they'll sleeve that in a conduit or PVC pipe, Schedule 40, and run that down along the well casing. An additional plan to extend the life of the pump is to install a VFD motor, variable frequency drive, which we have on all of our regular pump stations, our distribution stations. We don't have those on the well pumps, so this is going to be something that we're going to kind of keep an eye on and see if that's something down the road when we do have a pump failure that we install the VFD. So a VFD motor will also reduce energy cost. Today we are requesting $111,201 for the emergency repair of the Mesa well, and that would come out of the 24-25 allowance fund.
Okay, any questions from the board for Todd? Okay, any questions from the audience? Any questions online? Okay, then can we get approval? I'm going to ask for consensus on this. I'll start with Director Hurley.
Yes.
Director Piaskowski.
Yes.
Chatton.
Yes.
Novello.
Yes.
Grom.
Yes.
And Horvath.
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, I would say let's take that and go with it. I don't know if I need to go to the regular meeting with it, but I think that let's just go ahead and do it.
Okay, very good. Okay.
If everybody's okay with that. Okay, everybody's okay with that, we're good.
All right,
Okay,
thank you.
Go for it. Okay, revised policy MO1, membership and activity cards. Director Cliff Swan, there he is. We're getting
Thank
down
you,
to the
President
end.
Larry. And real quick here, this is, we have to recommend a change to this policy because of the state statutes that were changed this year. And we neglected to address this policy when we addressed policy FY13, our collection policy. So we're trying to align those policies. So without rehashing history, basically what we need to do is align our two policies. And this change, we changed our lien notice to a 60-day lien notice in our collection policy. So we're trying to align those two dates, or those two timelines. And that's simply what we're doing here with this policy.
Okay, so just the one change that was highlighted in yellow.
Yes, the change there,
Yeah.
and then changing
right.
yes.
Okay, any questions from the board? Okay, questions from the audience? Online? Okay, then do we have consensus to move this to the regular meeting to vote on? Director Horvath, consensus?
Yes.
Grom?
Yes.
Novello?
Yes.
Chatton? Yes. Pyskowski?
Yes.
And Hurley.
Move it.
Okay, we'll move it to the regular meeting. Okay, we got two more items to go. 312 is just, I think, can be a very quick one. There's been discussion, or I've been asked by our general manager if we can have staff, newly hired staff, go through, appropriately hired staff who have a need to go through Torch, if they can sit in and audit the sessions. They would not displace a resident. They would sit at the back of the room. They would not be part of the groups, but they would just audit that. They would get the little book that happens, and the request has been, 1 to 2 people, so as not to overwhelm resources. I just want to get consensus from the governing board that that's what they're willing to do.
May we comment on it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I've made this recommendation before, but I think it would be worthwhile. The Torches classes, there's a lot of presentations, and then there's a lot of other stuff that goes on there. And I always thought it would be helpful to record the presentations and put them online for people that, for anyone that wanted to look at them. I know realtors would be glad to do that instead of sitting through the class all day. And I just wonder if that would be a good alternative. The Torch clerks is already going for this one, right? So it would have to be the one for the fall.
The one in the fall, exactly.
Yeah, but I'd just like to make that as a suggestion.
Okay, thank you. I'll see that that gets to the Torch committee. Any other comments? Director Pyskowski?
Yeah, you just want the presentations, so the questions, and I was there yesterday, so the questions and that kind of stuff from
Right,
the audience. So
right.
Yeah.
we could start if they could get it going.
Yeah, well, we've already had one session, so we'll wait till the fall, but yeah. Okay, are you okay with the request, Tim?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
Director Pyskowski? Director Chatton? Yes. Director Novello?
Yes.
Director Grom?
Yes.
And Horvath?
Yes.
Okay, there you go, Mr. General Manager. You're all set. Okay, last one. The PORA matter discussion. So PORA was here last time. We voted on at our regular meeting. We voted not to fund them. I have had a couple of exchanges with the PORA president. They were to have a meeting this past Monday, but they had to cancel it due to their board being ill, so they did not have a quorum. So at this point, there is no new news to report at this point, but the door is still open for PORA to come back to us with what they want to do next. So are there any questions? Okay, and from the audience? Online?
Nothing online.
Okay. Then with that, I'll go to director comments. I'll start down here with Director Horvath. Do you have any comments?
Only that I was just really pleased with the presentation by the B&F. That was excellent.
Yeah.
And I think it answered a lot of questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. Director Grom?
No, sir, nothing to add.
Okay. Director Novello?
I'll pass that and all the other audience feedback I received on to the working group in the Budget and Finance Committee. I'd also like to thank the other two working groups that are up and going. Right, we saw that huge. We have a huge debt of gratitude to all of our committee members and to these working groups that work very long hours. So thanks to the RR&P working group and to the GO6 policy working group as well. That's it for me.
Okay, Director Chatton?
I would just like to say I really enjoyed the presentation on investments. I had watched a couple of them online previously. And, you know, this board does a lot of things that future boards can change. That doesn't make what we do on a monthly or daily basis not important. It is still important, and we just simply have to trust that boards in the future will be as wise as we are. That's it.
Okay, Master. Director Piaskowski.
Yes, the presentation was great. I do think if we change the policy that our board changes every year, and within 3 years we have all new people. So we need to really see if we can stay the course, and I'm not too sure how that works in writing that policy.
Thank you. Director Hurley.
Yes. I had put together a timeline of when the policy for the reserve fund had changed, and there was, I'm trying to remember what year it was. I think it was 4 years ago. There was a meeting where they changed it, the ratio from 80-20 down to 90-10. And if I remember the details of that meeting, that was more of a knee-jerk reaction. So I appreciate the fact that this is a little bit more well thought out, and I'm interested to see how it turns out. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that was a knee-jerk reaction to a one-time incident. So I will add a comment. I appreciate everybody on the board, of course, but I also want to recognize and build on what Christine said, the committees and the working groups. It's important to remember that these are our neighbors that are on these committees and these working groups. These are people who have not been elected to a position here, but are still interested and want to help our community. And it's, if you see any of those committee members and you see them out and about, please thank them, because they put in as much or more than any of us up here on the dais. They are very hardworking. So thank you to all of them. So, oh, we have something online.
This is from Debbie Johnson, 130208. Please explain why Director Horvath and Director Piaskowski are not included on any committees. Mentoring is important for new directors. 4 current directors are leaving soon.
Those were decisions that were made at the time that the committees were staffed, and those are between the president and the members of those and those directors. And that's all that needs to be said on that. Okay, with that, the next workshop is March 14th, 9 a.m. in the lecture hall here. What, oh, we have a comment from the audience? Oh, well, Tom, the car show's over.
You didn't win the car either.
Yeah, I bought my ticket from you, Tom. You told me it was a winner.
It was a winner, it just wasn't, you weren't the winner. Okay, so the question is, who won the car? His name? His name was Terry Davern. He bought the ticket for his wife, Marilyn Davern. She had to go back to Minnesota on Tuesday, and he couldn't be here today because he had a doctor's appointment. But he wanted to let the governing board know that they have loved their past 24 years in Sun City West. Now, Terry is member number 97 at ARC. which means he was one of the first 100 members that joined to start the club. So that puts it in perspective. And we just I appreciate the fact that I know who got the car. And and Cliff, do you still have the title? Just signed off on it today. Okay, thank you. I'll let my wife.
Sure. Suzanne Jones, 110391. And I'm here just to say thank you. The car show was a huge success. Every space was sold. Now, not everybody came that bought a space, but every space was sold. We made a huge amount of money, and that means we get to give money back to the rec center, and we get to give more money to charity. And that's really what we're about, because we're 501c3 at ARC. So I'll start by thanking Jack Leary, our governing board president, and all of the members of the governing board. You have given ARC so much leeway in allowing us to do what we do and raise money, and we thank you for that. And then the general manager, Steve Erno, you're new to this, and I hope you were overwhelmed with joy as you saw our car show. It's a lot of work that is put into it, but we don't do it alone. We have the rec center. We have Casey Huda. She's already left, but she is our mentor, and we really appreciate all that she does for us. And Carl, right down here, he's helped us in the past too. And I'm getting to Sabrina. And Katie O'Grady, she has helped us with a myriad of things. And Cliff Swan, who holds the title to that lovely winning dream car. Every year, the CFO holds that for us. And we thank you because we pay a lower amount of insurance on that car, and it allows us to get more money back to you. And the facilities maintenance, Russ Boston, he's not here. I'm number 2 in his fan club, just so you know. Scheduling, Laura Petrin, she schedules everything that we need, and we need everything up here on the rec center. It's just amazing. Facility operations manager, Sabrina. She was new this year. She actually did the judging for the class for the rec center, and she's a gem. We are blessed, truly blessed, to have her on our side. And then we had the facility operations supervisor, Don Daughtry. We've worked with him like 3 years now, and he is amazing. He's on speed dial on my phone, and I called him a number of times, and one of the biggies was we didn't know that we needed to have some additional electricity. Within an hour, he had that done along with his cohort, Chris, and I don't know how to pronounce his last name, so I'm not even going to try, but he was fabulous. And then Martin did drone photos. Oh, it shows the crowd. There were a huge number of people there. Our car show chairman, Gary Masick, he's done this since 2018, so he has 7 years of it under his belt. He's not going to return next year. He thinks he needs to retire, and I understand. It's a tremendous amount of work. There were over 100 ARC volunteers that he helped to organize and get into groups and do everything that needed to be done. We had show sponsors. Our number 1 anchor sponsor is no longer going to be with us next year. And so we're going to have to go out and get somebody else to take over that. But we had participants. We had thousands in the crowd. If you tried to walk down the rows, it was very, very crowded. And we're so thankful for the people of our community, all of Sun City West, who came out and supported us in a wonderful, wonderful manner. So thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne and Tom. Okay, I will repeat, our next workshop meeting is March 14th. Uh-oh. I got one more, sorry.
Sorry. And I really feel bad coming in after that lovely presentation. Jim Scott, 404675. Switching gears a little bit, I'm a little confused and I was hoping to get some kind of clarity. I've been watching a lot of the videos online with the other committees, and unto which I greatly appreciate. In regards to the January 7th Chartered Club Committee, I have no affiliation with the tennis folks. I'm outside looking in, and I'm just a little puzzled in regards to the tennis club and their accommodation requests. I guess my first question is, who's got the authority to approve the accommodation request in regards to the RR&Ps as they are written today?
As they are written today, they are incorrect. The committee, they are incorrect. The RR&Ps today say that the committee can make the decision.
Correct.
The answer is that is incorrect.
What makes that incorrect?
Because our committees do not make decisions. They make recommendations. So the governing board is the one who makes the decision on the accommodation requests.
Interesting. So we have other documents out there that are incorrect?
I don't believe so. This is one that was discovered after the fact, and I believe that's one of the things that's in the changes to the RR&Ps. But in practice, it has been corrected.
Gotcha. And then I guess that kind of alludes to my second question, I guess. Did they ever get their accommodation requests to move forward? Or is it even worth still pursuing?
Yeah, so we've worked with the tennis club to figure out a solution for them where they are paying guest fees based on their tournament. So we've worked with them in order to make that happen.
So we're charging them the $800?
It's not $800.
Well, that's what during that meeting in January 7th was that they could just go ahead and pay the guest fees, and they popcorned out $800.
Yeah, I'm not sure where that number came from, but it's not $800. In fact, it's a very minimal amount. And it turns out actually the number of guests that they needed was 7.
Okay. So it all worked itself out with the tennis club?
Yeah, I think operations kind of took over and resolved the issue, so we didn't have to move it forward.
Right. Yeah, because I really felt embarrassed with the bureaucracy of that committee. It just felt like it felt like I was watching my dog chase his tail.
Well, in defense of the committee, that was the first accommodation request ever. So it was a learning experience for everybody.
Understood.
And it was an experience that made us believe that we don't believe in accommodation requests. So anyway.
And then secondly, President Leary, I have to second, the community voted on 3 new directors, and for them not to be placed on committees as either a chair or a co-chair, I feel like maybe you've got your respective reasoning, but I feel like we're being shorted as a community, and our directors are being shorted experience through their directorship, if you will. So I would hope you'd reconsider or figure out how we can get these guys some experience and exposure and involvement with the committees. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, last call. Anybody online?
Nothing online.
Okay, third time's a charm. Our next governing board workshop is March 14th here in the lecture hall at 9 a.m. And our next governing board regular meeting is February 20th, which is next week, next Thursday at 9 a.m. here in the lecture hall. And with that, I will adjourn this meeting at 11:54. Dennis, you have 6 minutes.